right, I have 10 o'clock. So welcome to Extension Welcome Week through Phelps County and surrounding counties. My name is Sarah Havens and I am a field specialist in natural resources. So today I'm going to talk about making seed bombs, and I'll demonstrate two different kinds that like. Are you there?
Yeah. Hello?
Yep. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. All right. So today we're actually in my kitchen. So if you hear dogs barking in the background, they belong to me. But yeah, this is also National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So kind of adding that to the mix. We use seed bombs a lot of times to make planting pollinator habitat really fun, particularly for kids. So the first type of seed bomb is a more traditional one that a lot of groups make. And so this one is more natural, not as bright in your habitat, but it involves clay. So I have some clay that I kind of harvested from my yard. I live in the Ozarks. We either have clay or rocks. So that gets mixed in with either a fine mulch wood chip kind of mixture, which is what I have here. You can also use peat moss for this. So the clay is important because that's what holds together the shape. And then the peat moss mulch, you can also add other organic materials. So I sometimes, we collect our coffee grounds. So I'll sometimes throw the coffee grounds in there as well. So they're great for adding to the garden. If you have a local Starbucks, oftentimes they also will give away their coffee grounds. So they'll have big bags of used coffee grounds that you can use. So if you are making a lot of these, that might help, or if you're just looking for some garden soil improvement. But that all gets mixed together. And then we, for pollinators, try to use native species. So I have a perennial mix that I found that I use with kids pretty often. You can also buy perennial mixes or pollinator habitat mixes in bulk. So from different seed companies, Hamilton Seed down out of Texas County, they'll sell bulk mixes of the pollinator mix. We also have a lot of fun harvesting our own seeds at our house. So I have native milkweed that is growing. I also have columbine. So those are two really easy to harvest seed species. But when I'm doing this with kids, a lot of times I'll bring the packet of seeds just because it's pretty easy for them to put in. So for making the seed bomb, it's actually really easy and really fun. So it all kind of gets mixed together. And then for the ones that we do with clay and natural soils, it really just ends up looking kind of like a mud ball. This will, if you leave it over time, so it'll dry out and harden. If you don't get it put in wherever you want to throw it right away, even once it hardens up, once you put it into the spot that you would put it in, once it gets rained on, it'll crumble back up. Seed bombs have kind of become popular. One is just a fun way to get kids involved in pollinators and pollinator habitat. But also if you're trying to repopulate perhaps a large space or field, or maybe somewhere that you don't want to walk into and plant seeds in, so perhaps pasture, you can do this pretty easily, or from a side-by-side or a four-wheeler, you can just kind of pop those out. I used to work at East Central College, and we managed a prairie there, and we used seed bombs to try and add various plant species to areas without having to wade into the prairie. So again, it kind of works for that. So this is, again, kind of that clay peat moss organic matter mixture. It's not very bright. And once you put it out, it is sometimes hard to keep track of where you planted your seeds. So again, these work really good for mass plantings. If you want to have a little bit more fun, something else I do a lot with my kids is we will make construction paper seed bombs. So this material is pretty easy and pretty cheap. So we take whatever color construction paper you like, and we'll tear it up and put it into a bowl, and we'll add water to that bowl and let it sit for just about 10 minutes so that the paper absorbs the water, and this helps the paper break down into more individual fibers. And then after it's soaked up some water, we'll add maybe a little bit more water and we'll put it in the blender. And I highly recommend, so this is a blender that I found at Goodwill for $5. So it's not my regular smoothie making blender. You probably don't want to cut paper up with your daily food use blender. But if you look at Goodwill, sometimes you can find a good deal and get just a cheap one. And so all the shredded paper plus the water goes in there, and we blend it. And it turns into, let's see if I can show this in the video. It'll turn into kind of a slurry of paper. And so when particularly with 4-H groups, I will pre-make all of this ahead of time. And so my daughter and I spent Monday actually prepping. So she got a little creative on me, and she mixed different colors. I don't know if you can see different colors of construction paper. This one's a mixture of blacks and blues. So we were calling that one our Galaxy version. I try to squeeze as much water as possible out of my construction paper when I'm making it. But like I said, I pre-make these all the time and bring them with me. It can get messy. So if you have a bowl to work over and some spare paper towels. The other thing that we will you can use for this is you can use candy molds or bath bomb molds or even muffin pans. So I've used muffin pans. The silicone molds work really well, but they'll take, I'm gonna try and do this over a bowl so I don't get water all over my floor. But take about a $50 sized amount of paper, and mine is still kind of wet. So while it's still wet, I'll add the seeds to it. And I also, so I did do some harvesting. I have some Giardia, which is the native kind of pollinator species. So I harvested these today. So I'm going to throw that in with my paper today. And then they'll want to mix, I'll try and show this as close as possible, kind of mix it in with the construction paper. And then when it's all kind of put together, this would be the time you could either smush it into a mold. So if you want to have heart-shaped seed bombs, round ones, you can do that. You can also just, if you don't have molds and don't want to use molds, squeeze off the excess water and it will hold its shape pretty well. And I try to make sure all my seed is kind of mixed in. It's not on the outside where it's going to fall off. And then there's my seed bomb. So it's ready to go out to the garden. Construction paper is great because it's biodegradable. So when it goes in the garden, it's going to break down. It's also kind of fun because then my kids know where their seed bomb pieces and the seeds kind of ended up because they can see the colored paper in the garden. And so then they can start looking for seedlings when they start to pop up. The other thing, of course, with this is that they can make all sorts of colors, all sorts of shapes. So I've done this with kind kind of elementary aged kids, and they'll mix all sorts of colors and get really creative. Sometimes they'll make them really big, which is always fun. But this is kind of a fun, crafty way to help our pollinators and to spread that seed. It also kind of makes gardening fun. And the paper ones can also be used in those larger spots. So if you're trying to repopulate perhaps an old prairie that was an existing prairie, you're trying to repopulate that with some pollinator habitat, or if you are trying to convert parts of the pasture into perhaps wildflowers or native grasses. So the sky's the limit for these. So you can pretty much add any type of seed. So milkweed has fairly large seeds, and we've added those with a lot of success. And they're fun to harvest yourself. Some of our seeds do need what we call stratification. So depending on what seeds you've picked out, so milkweed is an example of this. So if you do the seed bomb method with them, they probably will have to overwinter in wherever you've planted them, in your garden or in your field. And then they have to go through stratification, refers to that freeze thaw process. And so they need to be stratified. And so that will help break down the seed casing for them. And then that allows them to sprout the next year. So if you do a seed bomb with milkweed, oftentimes we will do those in the fall because that's when they produce their seed, but then they'll get spread out in the winter. You can also, if you have milkweed seed and you kind of wanted to start it right now, you could put it in your freezer and stratify it that way to get it started. So some of our species do require stratification. Other ones like columbine, they don't require that. So you can put them right in the garden and hopefully see seedlings this year. But yes, so we do this quite a bit at our house. It's just kind of a fun activity and a way for us to spread some of our seeds that we've collected. So we also enjoy collecting seeds. And it doesn't take very long to make even a yard into a pollinator oasis. So we planted, we did start with plants for our milkweed, but we planted about 50 stems of swamp milkweed. In the first year, we had over 50 monarch caterpillars. And last year we had, at the most we ever counted at one time was about 175 monarch caterpillars. And that's just in our probably half-acre yard that we have. So it doesn't take tons and tons and tons of acres to become a pollinator, like I said, pollinator oasis, and to help with those numbers. When we talk about pollinators, monarchs, of course, are kind of our headlining species, but there's lots and lots of native, other native pollinators, butterflies, some different native bee species. So all those are important to pollination in our food sources, and it's important we provide habitat for them. Did anybody have any questions? So this is a pretty simple project and kind of fun. You can, again, also the paper ones, you can let these dry out as well. So if you put them in a mold, they suggest letting them dry out before you pop them out of the mold so they're completely dry. If you do the round ones, we sometimes store them in Ziploc where they stay a little bit moist, or I'll set them out and they can dry. You can use them kind of either way. When they're in between, they will sometimes be crumbly. So if they're not wet, like when we made them, and if they're not completely dried out, they can crumble a little bit easier. But again, kind of just a fun activity to do. I sometimes do this just on my own. I love the colored paper because I love being able to see where my seeds have been dispersed. And over time, of course, it biodegrades and it'll kind of mix in with your garden soil, so you won't see the colors forever. Any questions? I was gonna say, I didn't run the blender today because it's kind of loud. But one of the kind of issues I had was with blending it first. And don't be afraid to add more water. That helps make it more of a slurry mixture. Then I drain the water off using a cheesecloth and a strainer. So I'll put the strainer and then I'll put cheesecloth in there, and then I dump my slurry mixture and kind of squeeze it out, squeeze the water out, and then I put it right into Ziplocs. Like I said, these will stay good for a while. So you don't want to leave the wet paper forever because can get moldy, but it'll last for a while. So if you have kind of multiple craft activities going on, you can have those saved up. I generally, my daughter got super creative and mixed the paper before we blended it. I usually kind of keep my colors all organized and then allow the kids to mix them when they're mixing the seeds in. Any questions? I'll answer questions also about pollinators or seed type.
Do you ever have weed seeds pop up in the ones that I know, like at the beginning you were showing you just harvested some native clay from your yard? So what do you do with weed seeds? Obviously there's weed seeds everywhere in native soil.
Yes, yeah. So we sometimes have weed seeds, and oftentimes I'll just keep an eye out for them. And I try to harvest, like I harvested from my yard, from an area so a little bit deeper, so I don't have as much of a seed source. And you can also, for this, if you kind of want to avoid the weed seeds, you can buy clay for this purpose, as well as the peat moss, which usually has been given some type of heat treatment. So we tend to heat treat that stuff so it doesn't spread a lot of times insects, but it also will treat some of our seed sources. But yeah, good question. So we, of course, we try to keep all the weeds out of our yard as far as non-natives. We do, of course, have fescue that is growing as part of the yard, which they definitely have a seed source that can get mixed in with that clay. So, and then the paper, the construction paper is a good way to avoid any weed seeds getting into it as well. Yeah, say it's always good to get particularly pollinator seed from good sources where you know you're going to get high quality seed and fewer, especially if you're getting a seed mixture, you want to kind of make sure you don't get any non-natives or what we would consider weed seeds mixed in. So we have several native seed dealers in Missouri that offer really high quality mixtures. Like I said, we enjoy kind of harvesting our own seeds from our plants that we have that are in existence. It's a little bit more time consuming, but also pretty fun. Some years we don't do as well as others. Like I had a bad milkweed year this year, so I had a lot of aphids that ate my milkweed, and it definitely affected the number of seed pods we had. My columbine right now are getting, so they're flowering and they're getting ready to put off their seed pods, and I'll wait till they turn brown and then I'll pull out. And they look kind of like a poppy seed if you're looking at harvesting. And those are my two big ones that are in my garden because they are good for the monarchs. So milkweed's great for the monarchs. And then my columbine is really well received by my hummingbirds. So they love the native columbine.
So if you're buying seed packets, how many bombs will that make?
So I have some seed packets that I purchased, I think from probably dollar store, but you can spread them out or you can put them all in one. You do want to, I usually split, like, so this is a 300 milligram packet. So it's got 300 milligrams of seed in it. I usually split this in two because when you, so when you throw them in, we like for them to break up just a little bit so the seeds get kind of dispersed. And then as the seed bomb gets integrated, so things like worms and ants, like they'll kind of break this up and mix it in with the soil, so they'll spread out over a patch. But you wouldn't want to put in so much that when it all gets there and stays, because it's probably going to fill in like a 1 square foot area. And then it'll establish, so it doesn't sound like very much, especially when you're talking about a field, but it will establish those plants. And then over time, particularly a lot of our pollinators are perennial seeds. And so what will happen is they'll kind of spread over time as they put roots off, and they'll have multiple stems from the same root system. So it'll fill in that spot quicker than you think. But I would say, like, depending on the size of your seed. So if I'm using milkweed, they're fairly large. So I would probably put 10 to 15 seeds in my seed bomb. If I'm using with a seed packet, I'll usually split this in half. If I buy it in bulk, just kind of measure out, because I don't want so much that it falls out of the seed bomb, because we want it to be integrated with the paper or the clay peat moss mixture that we're using. So I kind of eyeball it. Does that help?
Yes, and I'm assuming you just toss them out. You don't plant.
No, well, I mean, you could plant them, but yeah, we just toss them out. And so the idea is kind of that they have a vehicle, if you will, to get integrated into the soil. And some of those seeds will get naturally planted. So ants are well known. They will actually take the seeds out sometimes and take them into their colonies, and they get planted that way. And then, of course, they have a little bit of material that helps kind of plant them. And most of our particularly native species, they don't require, like, they'll grow on top of the soil. They don't even require too much on top of them.
Okay, so when you do this with kids, you just give them enough of the paper mixture and just a bit of seeds, and they just mix one at a time?
Yes. So, and I oftentimes, again, because even when I squeeze the water out of them, I want them to have enough water to mold it. So I'll usually give them some type of like mixing bowl or to work over. And then, yes, they generally measure out enough to make, again, I make mine, it's like $half size, not large. I've of course worked with lots of kids that they'll make ginormous ones, which my, of course, story to them is that you have to get this all out there into the garden somewhere, and you don't want it to fall apart. So the smaller they are, the more they stick together. If you do the molds, also it's good to let them dry out, because they're a little bit sturdier if you do like heart shaped or star shaped. So I've seen those types of molds used. And then it can get messy. I always joke that in my mind, I have to add like 50% more messy when I involve kids in my projects. But most of it's, of course, washable between either the dirt or the paper. Like I said, my kids like the paper because they like the kind of craft aspect of mixing colors together. I had one 4th grader, he was really interesting. He made a blue and green, and it kind of looked like an earth, which was really appropriate for Earth Day. So that was fun. And again, the colors kind of help them keep track of their seeds that they planted or threw out. Plus, again, multiple colors, crafting, a little bit messy, and then you get to throw it out into gardens. So it's got lots of fun components. So again, we talk about promoting this with native pollinator species. But, you know, if you were planting like a flower bed, you could also put in, you know, an annual mixture of seeds as well. So, and it's a pretty affordable craft as far as buying construction paper and then water and seeds. The seeds might be the most expensive part of it, unless, like, of course, you harvest your own. Any other questions today?
But you can plant any time of year. It doesn't necessarily matter except for the milkweed.
Yeah, so the milkweed and some other species that are particularly perennials, they do that stratification process. But yeah, you can plant any time of year. Most of our pollinator species are perennials, so they'll establish themselves. They may not look, I do quite a bit of native plantings in my own yard, and I've had instances where I'll start from seed, or I'll buy the small plugs that go in, and perennials, they really establish their root systems first, and then they'll start working on the top. So I have some, I think it's willow leaf coneflower, and I had the sparsest plant for 2 years, and then this year it finally looks hardy. And that's because they will spend a lot of time working on those root systems before they work on the top part. So most of our native prairie grassland flowering species, they have really deep root systems. So they'll do that part first. And then once they're established, then they have a little bit showier up on top. So don't get discouraged if you're trying to switch particularly to native plant species, because it can sometimes just take a while for them to fill in and look good.
And you suggest mostly sunny areas or anything shady?
It depends what species you're working with. So again, my two favorites are milkweed and columbine, so I talk about them a lot. But so columbine does really well in shady areas. If you're looking to add that, or a flower that does well. We also have some kind of forest flower species that do well in shade because that's what they're used to growing in. So kind of researching what you're planting. If you're looking, so there's a Missouri Wildflowers is up in, I think Brazito is actually the town they're considered in. But on their website, they have really great descriptions of a lot of the native plant species. So they don't sell much seed, but their resources are great for researching what you might be planting in your yard if you're going to try and go with a native mix. If you kind of go with so I also have some annual cut flower seed mix. Again, when I'm doing with kids, this is kind of an affordable way to go. But this has kind of the different things that are in there, and you can research those types, what the mixture contains. So I've also done this with, so I, again, try to stick with as much native as possible, but I also like some annuals to kind of give my flower beds color. So I often, and we have a pretty shaded yard because we live kind of in a forested area, but we will plant impatiens, kind of put color in between, particularly like my hostas and some of my other plants that stay green most of the year. And I've actually harvested the seeds from impatiens and then had them kind of, my kids did some of these and then I did replant some of them. But that also kind of filled in some of my half shade, half sun spots. Anything else? Well, I appreciate you guys all joining us for Welcome Week through Extension. There's a couple more programs this week that we have coming up. So be sure to check out our website or the Facebook page to see those upcoming programs that we have. And then, of course, all through the year, we offer programs as well. So it's a little bit different times with us offering some of them on virtual formats, but it does help us connect with an even broader audience. So it's been pretty fun. And again, my name is Sarah Havens. If you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime. So most of my specialty is in habitat management, forest management, and working with wildlife and native species and those types of things. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.